Is it lonely as a psychopath? Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. I'm often asked, am I lonely? But let us consider the position in relation to three categories of individual. Long-standing viewers and readers of my work know that for the purposes of helping people understand about narcissism and also to an extent psychopathy, I divide human beings up into four base categories. Empaths, normals, the largest group on the planet, narcissistic people who are not narcissists, and the narcissists. And alongside that, we also have psychopaths, although I don't always mention them because they are far rarer. But for the sake of this, if we divide people up into empaths, normals, narcissistic individuals, and then let's call them the disordered. Within this disordered group, you can have lots of different disorders. After all, the DSM is chock full of them. But let's focus on three: narcissists, narcissistic psychopaths, and psychopaths. First of all, let's deal with the narcissist. Does the narcissist feel loneliness? Well, often narcissists don't because of their need for fuel. Fuel is one aspect of the prime aims and a very important one. And the necessity of receiving fuel means that the narcissist is compelled to seek out a reaction from people. So that might be going and having sex with somebody. It might be ringing somebody up. It might be sending somebody a provocative text. But it forces the narcissist to have an interaction. The narcissist may perceive that they have a sensation of loneliness when they're not around people in order to compel them to pursue fuel. Thus, the narcissism essentially tells them, oh, you feel lonely, although the narcissist actually doesn't, but is told this by the narcissism. So the narcissist goes, oh, okay, I'm lonely, I'd better go and seek out a friend. When in actual fact, what's really going on is the narcissism is saying, you need some fuel, we're going to tell you that you feel lonely, so that you then believe that to be the case, so that you then are compelled to have interaction with somebody else and thus you seek fuel. Accordingly, a narcissist might say, oh, I feel lonely, in order to elicit sympathy from somebody, to cause that person perhaps to invite them to an event, which would be a residual benefit and of course would show that person is under control, and it would also allow them to draw fuel from them. The narcissist, loneliness is a device, like so many others, to get them along that freeway to the destination of the prime aims. What then about the narcissistic psychopath, an individual such as I? Now, in my instance, I'm primarily a psychopath with narcissism alongside it, because all psychopaths have narcissistic traits and often quite strong ones. And as I've explained, a lot of my knowledge about narcissism comes from the people that I've been involved with, family members, people in social groups, people that I've worked with professionally, etc., which has enabled me to explain them so well to so many people. I also have a need for fuel, though it's not as great as that of the pure narcissist. That means that I have a compulsion to engage with people in order to draw fuel from them. Thus, that means that I have interactions. But I'm perfectly capable of being on my own for quite a number of days with no or minimal interaction with other people. And that's because, as a narcissistic psychopath, my need for fuel is not as great as that of the narcissist. Focusing on that aspect, I'm now also going to bring in the pure psychopath. The pure psychopath doesn't have a need for fuel. That's one of the fundamental differences. And it's often said, of course, that psychopaths are known as being loners, though not all. After all, there are certain psychopaths who are particularly charming, have extensive networks of individuals that they interact with, and on the face of it, seem to be a well-functioning human being. But let's consider, is it the case that I, as a narcissistic psychopath and a pure psychopath, experience the concept of loneliness? After all, it's accepted that we can spend long periods of time away from people. For instance, particularly with the pure psychopath, they don't need people for fuel. My fuel needs are much less than a pure narcissist. Therefore, both categorizations can spend quite a lot of time away from people. Then also factor in that with certain of those individuals, both narcissistic psychopath and psychopath, their behaviors might lead to them being shunned by individuals, particularly those who are of a lower function, that lack the charm that is associated with certain psychopaths. And instead, they're shunned by people. Might they feel a sense of loneliness? Well, in actual fact, what it is not loneliness per se, but something associated to that. You see, the narcissist does not attach to people because of the absence of emotional empathy. The narcissist attaches people to them for the purposes of accessing them by way of a fuel matrix. The narcissistic psychopath does not attach to people because of the absence of emotional empathy and alongside, like the narcissist, the need to nullify potential threats to control, but deals with people because there is a necessity for fuel. And, of course, there's a necessity to use people to get towards certain aims and outcomes. The pure psychopath isn't attached to people, again, because of the absence of emotional empathy. But people are then attached to the psychopath because the psychopath has a need to interact with people. Is this to stave off loneliness? Well, on the face of it, it might look that way. But what it is important to understand that one of the most important aspects to both narcissistic psychopath and psychopath is stimulant. And people are stimulants. People stimulate us, for instance, when we have sex with them. People stimulate us when they have something interesting to tell us. People stimulate us when they have a reaction to something that we've done. People stimulate us when they entertain us in a particular way, singing a song or performing a play. People stimulate us for seeking our assistance with something. People stimulate us by sharing a secret with us. People stimulate us on an intellectual level by telling us something that is interesting, something that holds our attention, because we need stimulation. The way that we have been created is that we need stimulation more than other people. I can sit and look out of the window and look at the view, but it doesn't take long before I'm bored of it. I need something else to stimulate me. And whilst I could go and read a book, and often I do, or watch a film, they're both forms of stimulation. People are particularly useful forms of stimulation. For me as a narcissistic psychopath, because of course they'll provide me with fuel, but also they act as a stimulant because their reactions entertain me. In a similar way for the psychopath, people are stimulants that are there to be played with. They're there as objects for us to use for our entertainment, to own them, to possess them, to draw them in and puppet them. Whilst the narcissist will puppet that individual in order to control them and draw fuel from them, to access character traits and residual benefits, the narcissistic psychopath draws that person in partially for fuel, but also as that stimulant. That stimulant to keep the boredom at bay. And ditto, the pure psychopath draws that person in because they are a stimulant. Thus, when there is an absence of people around the narcissistic psychopath or psychopath, it's not loneliness that we experience, because actually we're entirely contemptuous of people. We see them as repeatedly disappointing, letting us down, unreliable, malfunctioning appliances that are there to be utilised as playthings. Instead, it isn't loneliness that we experience when people aren't around us, it's boredom. The psychopath doesn't feel lonely, oh, I haven't got any friends, I've no one to sit with, but rather, I'm bored. I need to be stimulated. Ditto the narcissistic psychopath. I'm not lonely because I have no emotional attachment to people. I'm not lonely because I can do things without people, but there comes a point where those forms of stimulation become insufficient. The playing a strategy game on a computer, watching a film, putting your collection in order, whatever it might be, will provide some degree of stimulation, but the best stimulation is people. And therefore, rather than experience loneliness, what it is that the psychopath experiences boredom. And it is the boredom that then seeks us to compel the pursuit of the reward chemical, which we get from being stimulated, that people are the best stimulants that one can come across for all of the various reasons that I've just explained. Boredom is the enemy. And in some instances, people might confuse the response of a psychopath to boredom as that being of a response to loneliness, but it isn't. Loneliness is predicated on some form of emotional connection between human beings. We don't have that. We use you. We use you as a stimulant. And thus it isn't loneliness that we experience, because as I've explained, there are many occasions where we are content to be on our own, planning, engaging in the assessment of our machinations, obtaining information, being stimulated in other ways. But there does come a point where that stimulation needs to be increased, and that's what people are there for. They're there to serve our purposes. They are there as those playthings. And thus, externally, you might think that the behaviour of the psychopath is one whereby they are lonely because they principally don't engage with people all of the time. But in actual fact, it isn't the case. That is preferred because we are above those individuals, that we don't want to be caught up in the dull minutiae of the drones' lives. But because we need stimulation, we need to play with those drones. We need to exact our machinations against them. We need to play them off against one another. We need to promote responses and reactions. We need to receive information from them, favours from them, sex from them, intellectual input, various distractions and so forth. And people are the best providers of those things. Hence, we don't experience loneliness. We experience boredom. And that's what drives us to interact with a stimulant that is a person. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.